Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission Podcast. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and we are on a mission to encourage and inspire you as you're navigating through this wild life and with your relationship with Yahweh. We are currently in a series about the goodness of God. And if you're tuning in for the very first time, welcome. I'm so glad you're here, but this is a pretty wild episode. So hopefully you enjoy this wild ride. So far in the series that we have been in, we have shared an incredible testimony from Lex Rennick, who is a woman who lived as a man for 14 years before the Lord called her to detransition and live her life as the woman that she was meant to be. She is now a mother to a young daughter and has another baby on the way. Super cool story. Definitely check out that episode. Actually, two episodes. We also heard from Madeline, who is a wife and a mother who experienced demonic oppression from her involvement with yoga. In her episode, she shares the details about her experience and how Yahweh delivered her from that oppression. So you'll want to check that one out as well. And in the weeks to come, you'll hear from my own husband. He was recently baptized and he's ready to share his testimony of how the Lord has delivered him. And his story includes some pornography addiction. And he shares some of the other lies that he was told during his young adult years as well. And then you'll hear from Sarah. She struggled with addiction and actually went through an abortion before giving her life to God. She's a super strong, just incredible testimony. So, yeah, so many powerful testimonies have been shared and are about to be shared in this series. But today I'm here to talk about how sharing these testimonies has challenged this podcast. I'm also going to be discussing the crazy things that are going on in the world right now. And then I'm going to close this episode out by spilling some special tea. I'm going to spill the tea for you guys on some personal news that you won't want to miss. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, this is going to be an exciting episode. Like I said, a little bit of a wild ride. So let's start with this series. I started this podcast in July of 2022 after the birth of my second child, Benny. And since then, this show has been going strong every Tuesday, despite the fact that I have now three children that are under the age of 4. I'm also the president of a software company that has expanded into a marketing agency. And I've shared before that this podcast is truly a mission that the Lord has sent me on to share about Him. So I've always found the time to record, edit, write show notes, create the artwork, and then get all these episodes and a blog article out every single Tuesday. Do a lot of things at nighttime. Like right now, it is 1:27 a.m. And when the Lord called me to do this series where I'm sharing testimonies, I was really excited about it. I thought that surely this was going to be like cupcakes and rainbows, it was going to be just easy breezy. Even though a huge theme on this show has been spiritual warfare. In fact, the very first series we did in episodes 3 through 5 was on spiritual warfare. And I didn't think much of it when I planned this series, really, when the Lord put it on me to do this series. And then I started planning it and reaching out to guests to come on the show. So, to be candid with you, I have had some wild things happen and what I consider to be spiritual warfare related when it comes to recording this show. I've had things show up before. So there were a few episodes that have been pretty significant. And in two of them, my audio was turned down to basically zero, and the other person's audio file was fine. And in another episode, there was another audio issue. And once when I was recording on another podcast with someone else, the podcasting program that was used to record literally would not work. It would not record. And we tried to move to Zoom and had problems there too. It was such a strange thing. And what was I there to share on that podcast? How pornography is demonic and it wouldn't record. So, yeah, some crazy stuff. Actually, in the early days of this podcast, there was a former psychic who gave her life to the Lord, and she was very excited to come share her testimony on the Radiant Mission. But every single time that we were going to record, something weird came up and we couldn't record. We never ended up recording. So, needless to say, definitely have had some random things happen in the past. And as I geared up for this series, I was really thrown some curveballs that I was not anticipating. Basically, every single person, every single one had to reschedule their recording day. And it, of course, it was always for different reasons, sickness or stuff with the family. And even my own husband got cold feet about sharing his story here, even though he shared bits of his testimony already. He really was questioning whether or not he was ready to just fully share his testimony. And of course, I definitely felt with him, I'm like, bro, this is some spiritual warfare going on, that you are you newly baptized, feeling the fire of the Lord and feeling nervous about sharing your testimony. But I wasn't going to push him. I don't want to push him. I want him to make the decision to share his testimony. So he has agreed to do so on his own terms. So it just has kind of seemed like week after week, something fell apart. And because this is a series on sharing testimonies, I didn't want to just jump in and record some random episode in between these testimonies just to fill my dates, right? Just to fill that Tuesday slot and fill those cancellations. It didn't feel right. But the weeks started to really pile up. And kind of simultaneously, I was planning a big 70th birthday party for my mom in another state. We also were planning a trip to visit Mike's parents, who also live in another state. And his mom was also having a milestone birthday. And then after all that, our littlest baby, Bryn, we were planning a party to celebrate her first birthday. So, needless to say, I have been managing quite a lot. And the constant cancellations and rescheduling of the recordings, it got me really off track. And 5 weeks of missed episodes is 5 weeks too many in my book. I've really felt convicted this week. I felt like the Lord was saying, what are you doing? Like, stop letting these unimportant things get in the way. Stop allowing these derailments of others to derail you. And I really felt that because I've also been feeling very strongly that He's calling me to talk about the Bible and to address some falsehoods that have been popping up related to what maybe some might call it deconstruction, and others are really not acknowledging it as even that. Basically, there's this trend going around where people are saying they follow Yeshua, but not the Bible, that Yeshua is speaking to them directly. And what I am reading and hearing sounds a lot like deception and like really more like a universalism or universal religion or one world religion or a let thyself be thy guide type of mentality. So I've been digging deep into the word, into prophecy, into prayer. And I know that this is a conversation that needs to be had right now. So I'm preparing that for the next series. And I hope you are excited to dive into that with me and you're open to, this topic as well. So I'm just going to put it all out there. And I really hate to say this, But I also feel that I need a break from scheduling with guests for a little bit after how things have gone with this series. It really has taken a toll on me because I could see the spiritual warfare happening right in front of me, and there was nothing I could do about it. Of course, I could pray about it, but it's kind of too late to pray about it when you're being canceled on minutes before you're about to record. So, I guess kind of what I'm saying is I feel like I'm looking forward to having better control over recording with it just being me versus the demons versus me and other people in the demons. Now, Rachel is going to get involved in this conversation, so I'm going to have to pray that the demons don't get to her and that she shows up for our recordings. But I don't let those demon fools get to me, and I will fight through with everything that I've got. It was a challenge even to get this episode together today, but I'm going to do it and I'm going to get it done. Whether my audio is broken or not, I'm going to find a way. So that kind of gets us through the first topic here today. So just wanted to address that. I don't want to miss any more weeks. I want us to get back on track. And next, I'd like to talk about what in the world is going on right now. Aside from all the spiritual warfare when trying to record for this podcast, there is also some extremely demonic stuff going on in the world. Of course, we already knew this. It's been like that for a long time. We've had the ongoing wars that are extremely dark. And as of late, we've had an assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. We've had some what appears to be elder abuse on the current president and the ever consistent turmoil in the media. It's full of division and this kind of push towards universal religion or one world religion that we are warned about in Revelation seems to be taking shape too. Christians claiming to follow Yeshua, but not the Bible. Children being encouraged to follow their hearts and transition to other genders or animals or whatever they want. A slew of other crazy things. I'm just naming off a few highlights here of some of the wild things going on. And listen, I'm not trying to get political here because this is not a political podcast. I am simply pointing out that politics are creating a very unstable environment for many people right now. And I believe that it's all by design. Call me a conspiracy theorist, and you can. It's fine. I'm not offended by that. But I'm really one of those nutbags that thinks there is, quote, an elite group of people or groups of people that control our governments and essentially the worldly world that we're living in. And what we see in front of us is just a big show. It's really a play, if you will, or a movie in some senses. And I don't like it. I really don't like the movie. It's not a good movie. I wish I could just turn it off. And I can. I can. I don't have to subscribe to it, right? The media exists, television exists to program our brains into certain belief systems. And if you're hearing some of these words for the first time, like programming, you probably think that I'm crazy too. And that's okay. Keep listening though. Hang with me for a minute. I want you to think about the human brain that God created. It is an extremely complex organ and it controls our thoughts, memory, emotion, touch, motor skills, vision, breathing, temperature, hunger, and every process that regulates our body. And then the brain, together with our spinal cord that extends from it, it makes up the central nervous system. So essentially, our brains are computers or akin to computers, right? They're a biological computer, so to speak. Our brains are responsible for information processing. So think about it like the brain receives information or inputs, And then it's going to select a method to understand it or process it. Then it's going to communicate those findings through thoughts or outputs. So, for example, the brain is going to use kind of inference to combine with new evidence with prior knowledge to quickly and accurately interpret its surroundings. Our brain is also responsible for computational efficiency, meaning it can generate a large amount of output with very little power. Doesn't take a lot. That's how it's built. That's how it's created. And this is orders of magnitude more efficient than electronic computers, actually. AI actually told me when I was doing a little research that the brain's power source is renewable solar energy stored in food, making it the greenest computer on Earth. It's pretty funny, isn't it? Now, how do processing systems work? They collect information, they process it, they store it. And I think that the easiest way to understand this is really by looking at new, tiny human computers. And yes, I am talking about children's brains. So let's think about little babies for a second. They come into this world, they're all fresh and new, and they're ready to learn. And let's think about for a second the children that are given love and encouragement and affection. They're taught to speak kindly to others. And what happens? They tend to reciprocate that behavior. On the other hand, children who are abused, talked down to, cast aside, given no attention by their parents except for negative attention, they tend to take that trauma with them throughout their lives. So let's apply that to our lives, to mine and to yours. Everything that happens to us as children, young adults, all of it is shaping us to be who we are. We have been told what we have been told and what we have been exposed to. It all shapes our mental computers and what we believe about ourselves and about the world around us. So let's circle that back for a second. What we have been told and what we've been exposed to shapes us and what we believe about ourselves and the world around us. So many of us are taught or programmed, I'm going to use that word program again, that certain people or groups have our best interests at heart, like doctors, teachers, governments, so on. There are people that are superior and there are people that are experts, and then there are people that are inferior that are not experts. And the public school system, for example, it is created to be a very fact-based type of system. Curriculum is created and taught in very absolute ways. So XYZ happened in history or in science, and everyone is going to learn the same thing. Children are not really taught to think, where did this information come from? Is it accurate? Is it the same information that occurred the day that this event happened? Did this event really happen? Now, listen, don't get it twisted. I'm not being specific here or trying to say that everything taught in school is a lie and everything's fake. A lot of it is. And there are a lot of deceptions. I'm really just trying to give some generic questions to get you thinking about this idea about how our brains are computers, how they're programmed, and the information, where the information comes from that programs our brains, right? Most people go to school. So I'm using that as an example because that is the largest programming center, or I'll jokingly call it indoctrination center, that exists. A smaller percentage of people are homeschooled and taught by their parents. And that is where they're getting their information or programming from, right? Well, I want to make this a little bit easier. So I'm going to give you an example that comes from my own experiences and likely yours as well. Okay. So here we go. Since the beginning of time, women have gotten pregnant. Believe it or not, they have grown babies and given birth to those babies. That's literally how we are all here and how we continue to be here and keep going on this earth. Yet, it's only been in the past 100 years, past century, that birth has become medicalized. And in that 100 years, most of society, and I say most because we can exclude indigenous cultures from this because they have been protected from this. But most cultures, and I'm really going to speak specifically to America because that's the only place I can speak to. I know other countries have similar things, but other countries are still very different. So let's talk about America, North America. North America, we have been completely brainwashed into thinking that birth is a medical event when it is, in fact, not a medical event. It is a physiological, biological event. So, in 100 years, something that is physiological and biological has become a medical event, medicalized, emergent. It is not an emergency and it does not require emergent energy. Yes, yes. I know what you're thinking. You know, this is how the conversation goes. Yes, a small number of women have experienced situations where some emergent care was needed, but the majority of women do not. It's really a minority. I'm talking less than 5 to 6% who require some sort of emergent care or need for medical care. Let that settle in for 1 second. Yet the medicalization of birth, it caught on like wildfire over the past century. And it has continued to exponentially over the past 30 to 40 years. Specifically, women went from literally birthing babies in a field or at home to giving birth in the same place where sick people are going to die. They are putting IVs with narcotics and are told that birth is a painful curse and that they will endure that painful curse if not for those drugs. OBGYNs are in medical school to become trained surgeons, and they rarely see completely physiological birth. And if they do, it's just a few. The art of birth, the experience of birth, the physiology, the biology of birth, it has been completely lost in just 1 century. Just one. And 99 out of 100 women that you'll meet out and about will have a medical mentality on birth. And I know this because I was one of them for my entire life until I was 33 years old. It took experiencing the atrocities of the medical system during birth to wake me up. There's really nothing like medical abuse to really smack you in the face. So it was really for me in attempting to heal from that trauma that occurred during the birth of my first child that God met me and said, "Learn about my creation. What are you doing? Why are you trusting and following this broken system that has taken my creation and turned it into something ugly?" He led me down a path of truth about the female body And it was like he led me to resource after resource that made it clearer and clearer that I had been programmed to believe what I believed about birth. What I did believe previously was not true, but I believed that it was because it's what I was taught to believe. And make no mistake, it wasn't from one person or situation. It was a culmination of how society views and treats birth as an experience. TV shows and movies are one of the first ways we are programmed with this. But if we really want to stop and think deeper, it's been going on for a few generations gradually. And as it's escalated, we have gotten to where we are today. So, my grandma, she did not talk about her births often or in detail, but I am very keenly aware that she was put under twilight sleep to give birth when she gave birth in the 1940s and 50s. So she might not have remembered much, but I can tell you, I have learned that her body remembers what happened to her. And so did the bodies of the babies that were born to her. Whether they can vocalize, verbalize, put that out there or not, our bodies go through that experience. They experience that trauma, whether they're cognitively awake and present or not. But aside from that, think about the fear that must be put into the children of these mothers who bore them while they were asleep. If your mom was like, yeah, birth, I was told birth was so painful, I had to get put to sleep. How do you think the next generation gave birth? It must have been pretty scary to go into thinking, oh my gosh, my mom had to get put out. That's how bad it was. Now, my mom actually had some situations pretty similar to mine in that she had bad experiences with her first two births in the hospital and experienced some trauma too. And then that was followed by her following a path to do some physiological natural birth with midwives. And it's kind of interesting when I think about it like that because I see how I kind of repeated history. Even knowing my mom's stories, I still was indoctrinated by the culture around me to go to a hospital. And you would think that I wouldn't, right? Because I heard her stories of what happened to her and then kind of how she stepped out of that system. But the point is, what we believe about birth, it is shaped by what we're influenced by, what we're taught, our experiences, and really largely by what is culturally acceptable. It is very difficult and challenging to go against the grain. It is not easy. You are a freak, essentially, if you go against what everyone else is doing. So, I tell anybody that I'm having a home birth, and what do they say? I could never do that. I'd be too afraid. What if something goes wrong? And why do they say this? Why do people say this? Because they have been taught, they have been programmed that at any moment something could go wrong. When the truth is, at any moment, something could actually go right. It's actually reversed. Nathan Riley is a former OB who turned into a home birth OB, and he's all over Instagram. He had a reel recently that addressed this really, really well. He was out picking blackberries with his daughter, and he had this big bucket, and he picked 99 blackberries and then one unripe red blackberry. So all these blackberries, and one of them was red because it wasn't ripened yet. So he put them all together in the bucket and he tossed the bucket around, and then he picked a berry to eat. And, did he get a red one? Do you think he got a red one? No. And what about the second time? Nope. Kept repeating it. He repeated it a bunch of times and he kept getting blackberries. And he said something like, keep in mind that the likelihood of any of the really bad things happening is way more than 1 in 100. It's in thousands. And then he used this blackberry demonstration to explain that we tend to educate around pulling the red berry instead of the juicy, sweet blackberry. So let that sink in for a second. We are educated and treated around things that have a likelihood of 1% or less in many cases, yet we treat them and our experiences like they're the 99% when it's flipped. I could go on and on with this analogy about our brains and birth, but I'll get back to the point of what's going on in the world in a second. I just really want to take a moment to encourage you that you can rewrite and rewire your own brain if you make the choice to do so. God tells us repeatedly throughout his word not to be fearful, not to be afraid. Yet we find ways to be terrified of nearly everything, including birth and medical things. So you can choose to follow what the Lord is telling us, and you can choose not to be afraid of birth. You can choose to forget everything that you have been told, and you can instead embark on this path where you learn about how God designed your body. And once you do, your whole entire mentality and all of your stored programming, it can shift. It can literally change. You can erase what you knew before and put new things in. And I know because that's what I did. I literally rewired my brain. And I'm going to admit something. It does suck sometimes because now I don't know how to talk to people in the world anymore. When I'm out in public, it's like I'm living in a different reality. So when I'm out and I hear women talking about inductions and pain meds during birth, I really struggle with how to share the truth in love because it is hard to do once you know the truth. It's hard to explain it. It's something I've been praying on. And of course, I could use your prayers on this too. I would love to help more women, but I struggle in the moment to really just explain what I've explained here. But anyway, let's get back to politics. If we can be programmed over a short century to go to a sick building for a natural, physical, physiological, biological event, what do you think has been happening with our government and world governments? The exact same thing. Our current system is nothing short of an illusion. Don't get mad at me. Don't get mad at me. Just stick with me and you'll understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. You know, the great America that we have been taught to love for its freedoms, while yes, we are more free than other countries, we have also been made slaves to it right under our own noses. So I want to bring us back in time a little bit. Do you guys remember that thrilling story about the Boston Tea Party back in the 1700s? And how, in protest to a 3 cents per pound tax on tea, dozens of men put on disguises and boarded 3 India Company ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. Remember that? Probably not, because it was 250 years ago. But yeah, that was 250 years ago, and we didn't take that little tax very well. And now here we are today in 2024, and we are paying 12 specific different taxes that in some states can add up to nearly 50% of a person's income. I can speak to this firsthand because I moved from Florida to New York City and lived there for a number of years and paid taxes that I didn't even know existed. Literally did not know that local and city taxes were even a thing. I knew I was going to have to pay state tax when I moved from Florida to New York, but the other two were added bonus. Speaking of bonus, I noticed this the most when I would get a bonus. It's harder to see on your actual paycheck because of all the various things that are taken out. But when you get a small bonus check, like let's say I would get a check for $3,000 as a quarterly bonus, my check after taxes would be half of that. So if I was going to get a $3,000 check, I was actually going to get $1,500. Pretty crazy. So in the US, we have individual income taxes, corporate income taxes, payroll taxes, capital gain taxes. When it comes to buying and purchasing, we have sales tax, gross receipts tax, value added tax, and excise tax. And then if you want to own something, you've got property taxes, tangible personal property taxes, estate and inheritance taxes, and wealth taxes. And that's folding in that first part where I talked about individual income. That's not even separating out when you're paying local, city, and state, like I mentioned. It's a lot of taxes, but nobody's sinking any crates of tea anymore because we have all been slowly warmed. We're like those, that whole lobster in a pot thing where it comes to a slow boil, they don't notice or something, or a frog in a pot. That's what it is, not the lobster. Where you put a frog in a pot and slowly bring it to a boil, they don't even notice that it's boiling, right? That's what life has become like for us with taxes. We have been slowly indoctrinated into it, into this highly taxed life over time. And heck, we even argue with each other about this on why we need these taxes and why they're good and et cetera, when we know that most of this and a lot of this is extraneous and we don't truly know what's happening with this money we're being taxed on. But, my beef today is not about taxes, though they are terribly high and though our government is extremely inefficient with them. I'm simply trying to point out another example of how quickly things can escalate and how comfortable we become because of the way that society is molded by special interests. So I've got one more for you. Well, I got a lot more for you, but let me have some tea. Oh, wow. Good. What good timing here. We have a little tea, a little English tea at the moment. All right. Let's talk about social security numbers. Yeah. You didn't know I was going to talk about this today, did you? I told you this is going to be a wild one. All right. Social security numbers. Children today, no clue that this is actually pretty new. They were rolled out in 1936, and they were part of the New Deal to track workers' earnings and provide benefits for retirement and disability. The very first Social Security number was issued to John D. Sweeney Jr. He was the age of 23 in New Rochelle, New York, of course, in New York, in mid-November 1936. And then the US Postal Service then distributed application forms to employers and employees through its 45,000 local post offices. So we are just 88 years later, and we are now in the belief system that in order to do anything in society, like open a bank account, get a job, get a driver's license, drive a car, whatever, that we need to register with the US government to receive a social security number. But what are we actually signing up for when we sign up for a social security number? We are enrolling ourselves in a system where we work like a slave to the tax system for our entire life. Now, I know we all got to work to live, right? So we do this. And maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic here, but it's something that's worth thinking about. Now, some people are choosing not to enroll their children into this system. And guess what? That's perfectly legal. And those children can also get passports and live their lives. But man, try having that conversation. Talk about birth is a hard conversation to have. People do not want to have this conversation without a fight. It's far and few between. But I do have resources for people that can teach you how to do that if that's something that you are interested in. Not that I'm pushing that or condoning it. I'm just letting you know that it is a thing. It literally is a thing. So that brings us to current events. Trump versus Biden. Or not anymore. Biden's out of the race. But let's back it up for a second because I have to share this interesting fact with you. Have you ever thought about how every election since 1976 has had the same three families on the ballot? So for the past almost 50 years, the same three families have been on the ballot. Okay, let's go through it. 1980, George Bush Sr. 84, George Bush Sr. 88, George Bush Sr. 92, Bill Clinton. 96, Bill Clinton. 2000, George W. Bush. 04, George W. Bush. 2008, Biden as VP. 2012, Biden as VP. 2016, Hillary Clinton. So back to Clinton. And then 2020, Biden as president. And now 2024 was Biden again. He dropped out. So, I mean, what's it going to be? Back to Clinton or or what? Yeah, it's pretty crazy that for about 50 years, the same three families are cycling through. That's really interesting. And there's so much that I could say about what's interesting in politics, but I told you guys before, this isn't a political show. You're going to have to special request for me or Rachel and I to talk more about politics if you really want to hear more about it. You probably don't because we're too crazy, right? But what I really want to say about politics and all of this, and to bring it back to the Bible and what this podcast is really about, which is the Lord and glorifying Him and bringing our attention to Him, is that we're being manipulated. Shocker, right? Psychologically, emotionally. It's why the news only shows the horrific things and there's only that tiny sprinkle of something positive every now and again because we are addicted to the drama. We're addicted to the fear mongering. And these agendas, they shape our minds, they program our minds, and it's to warp them. How I'm going to say they in this sentence, how they want to warp them. And now I'm going to define who they is. It's the enemy. It's an enemy tactic. It is demonic. If there is one place that the enemy has slithered into, it is television. Literally, the television, it is the biggest programming tool that exists. Think about how you get into a very quick, very quick state of hypnosis when you are sitting in front of the TV. And I'll give you the easiest example. Take a small child and put on a fast paced show like Coco Melon or even Danny Go and watch those kids get sucked in and they cannot remove their little tiny eyes. And all of the synapses in their brain are firing and they just want more and more and more. The same exact thing happens to us. We are grown-ups, but we don't see it because why would we want to see it? It's entertaining, right? The enemy wants us sucked into that because he can use it to manipulate us and he can use the people that create TV shows and movies and the news. He can move through them. Like it's the easiest scheme. It's the easiest way to do it. If you wanted to reach millions of people, what way would you use to do that? A way to get to people, right? Like I'm talking to on a podcast right now. I could go talk to people on the street. That would be a lot harder to have these kinds of conversations. But to share something publicly on the internet, it's a much more vast way to reach people, right? So the enemy wants us enraged. He wants us fighting and wants us arguing with our neighbors and wants us to stay divided. Because when we're doing that, when we're disagreeing, when we're fighting, when we're arguing, we're distracted and we aren't acting in love. We are looking for the worst in our neighbors instead of the best. And we're talking about the travesties instead of talking about testimonies and the saving grace of Jesus Christ. Plain and simple. In Ephesians 6, starting in verse 10, we are told, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Now, that was ESV, and I want to read verse 12 in King James Version. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. What are they talking about? What, what? What's going on there? It's a great question, right? I'll go ahead and finish this out. Verse 13. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day. And having done all to stand firm, stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Praying at all times in the Spirit with all prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints, and also for me, that words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that I may declare it boldly as I ought to speak. Pretty powerful stuff there. So, to close out this part of the episode, I just want to say, do not allow politics to ruin your relationships, your friendships, your family bonds. In the grand scheme of things, we should not be putting our attention and passion towards this anyway. We have way more important things going on, like, I don't know, biblical prophecy unfolding right in front of us. Israel has become a nation again, and other prophecies and Revelation seem to be kind of like right around the corner. It seems like the Antichrist could make way at any moment. So, as we watch the Pope embracing this idea of a universal religion, one world religion, and we even saw glimpses of this the other day at the RNC event that was on July 15th, when Harmet Kaur Dilion, she is a national committee woman of the Republican National Committee for California, and she led the assembly in prayer. And she lauded Trump. She thanked God for protecting him from harm. Except her prayer was a Sikhi prayer. I don't know how to pronounce that correctly, but she thanked, quote, God for creating America as a unique haven on this earth where all people are free to worship according to their faith. So let's talk about that for a second here. Sikhism is a monotheistic and pantheistic religion that was founded in the Punjab region of India in the late 15th century. It is the world's fifth largest religion with over 25 million followers worldwide. The word Sikhi, which I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing correctly, it means learner or seeker of truth in Sanskrit. And it is believed that there's a belief in one God called Wahiguru, who is an all encompassing and present within everything. And they also believe in the oneness of all beings and the equality of everyone. So, what does this have to do with biblical prophecy and Revelation? Well, in Revelation 17, there is mention of a quote, great prostitute or great harlot. And that's generally understood as a metaphor for a false religion that will exist during the tribulation period. And many have debated the identity of this religion, some arguing that it's the Roman Catholic Church or Islam or another large religious movement that will be the end times one world religion. But it's also probably more likely that the false religion of the last days will consist of an all inclusive religion that allows for this pluralistic view of God. And this would even include, liberal monotheistic groups that see all religions as one and are willing to worship the Antichrist in these last days. This is kind of what I mentioned earlier that I want to address about the Bible that I'm seeing happen more is it's many people that I'm seeing in the quote new age community that are saying that I, communicate with Yeshua, but we are all one. And it's falling into that territory, right? Back to Revelation, whatever this religion is, it is certainly going to exclude any faith that is exclusive and refuses to worship the Antichrist and or his image. So in Revelation 17:6, it states, "And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus." So this false religion will permit and even encourage the death of those who follow Jesus during the tribulation. To dig into this a little bit more, this false end times religion will include sexual immorality. That's in verse 2 of chapter 17. And it will likely have its headquarters in Rome, as that's often described in the New Testament as Babylon. So Revelation 17:5 and 1 Peter 5:13 are some references there. So some see this false religion as kind of short-lived, since the Antichrist will demand people worship him at the midpoint of tribulation, but it may continue and include worship of the Antichrist, and it will be opposed to Christians as well as reject the Jews, since the Antichrist is going to defile the temple as an abomination and of desolation, which you can refer to Matthew 24:15 for that one. But ultimately, the deception during this time will be so great that Jesus taught in Matthew 24:24. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Even the elect. So, listen, friend, all I'm trying to say is focus your eyes on the Lord right now and get to know his word. Dig into Revelation, into the New Testament, into all of it. Dig into the word. Ask Yahweh for discernment and to open your eyes to what is really important. And I can guarantee you, he's not going to say, uh, argue with your aunt on Facebook about Trump versus whoever they're going to slot into this show. Break free from the matrix. Sorry, I had to say that. But really, don't let these illusions swallow you up when we have kingdom work to be done here, y'all. We have kingdom work to be done. So, all right, I have gone down some real tangents today, and hopefully you made it this far. I promised you that at the end of this episode, I would spill the tea Let me get my tea again. Spilled the tea on something personal, and I will deliver on that promise. In just a moment. I'm going to have some tea. All right. So, Mike and I have some news. We are happy to announce that the Lord has blessed us with another sweet baby. You probably knew that was coming. I am currently pregnant with our fourth baby. And I mean, super freshly pregnant, but I really feel called to just talk about this baby because I know that this is a strong baby that is meant to do the Lord's work. And I'm just sensing that she or he, I think is a she, we'll see, feels like such a precious gift already. And I really am, I'm just feeling something special going on. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with everybody. And yeah, you probably knew that already. You probably knew this announcement was coming, but if not, probably still wasn't enough. Anyway, please be praying for us and for a healthy pregnancy and birth. And thank you for tuning in today and for being on this journey. As always, if you'd like to follow along outside the podcast, you can do so on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube at The Radiant Mission. And today I'm going to close with Matthew 6:33. Matthew 6:33. Seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and He will give you everything you need. Wishing you a radiant week, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.